Hello, I am Jerry Page. I am with Jack Snowden. Today is July 18th. I am in Savannah, Missouri, and I'm with Jack, who is from Turkey, which is very exciting. So thank you, Jack, for letting me interview you and get to talk to you and learn a little bit about yourself. But go ahead and start with when and where you were from and kind of take it away.
Well, I was born just about 75 years ago in Mineola on Long Island in New York. And then we moved to Queens in New York City. And I essentially grew up in Queens, Bayside and Flushing in New York City. And then I went to, I went through Catholic grade school and Catholic high school and then into Catholic University at St. John's. But I think, as I already mentioned, all my friends went away to school, so I was itching to go away myself, but I didn't have any money. So I looked around for a place where I could afford, and I found Northwest Missouri State College in Maryville, which is not too far from where you are right now, which is something of a coincidence, to say the least. And but I went out there. I have some relatives in St. Louis, so that kind of helped make the choice. And I went out and spent a semester there, and I had a lot of fun and learned some important things, more about life than about book learning. I mean, the school was great, but it was my first time away from New York City, so that was important as part of the life process. So then I went back and I finished at St. John's, but it was 1974, and New York was in bad shape economically, and I really didn't feel like I could get myself a job that would keep me alive. So I decided to join the Air Force, much to everyone's surprise, my family and friends included. But the war in Vietnam was over, so I figured, and rightly so, that I wouldn't have to go there. But I don't know whether you know, but when you join the service, they decide what they're going to do with you. You can make some suggestions and make some requests, but ultimately, in my case, the Air Force decided that I was going to learn Turkish. So they sent me to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, which is great service if you're in the, if you're a young airman in the Air Force. But I had my college degree, and I went through a year of learning Turkish, which was, challenging to say the least, for somebody who really never had worked with languages before. But then they sent me, after language school, I went to survival school up in Fairchild Air Force Base in the state of Washington, and then down to Miami for water survival school. But in Fairchild, at Fairchild Air Force Base, we had, in addition to survival in the woods, trapping squirrels and getting your dinner that way, we also had POW training, which was very realistic. And we spent about 24 hours in POW camp. And after a while, we started to think that it wasn't training. We started to think it was a little too real. And then at about the point where we were about to go nuts, the commandant called us all together, and he said that we weren't making significant progress and we're going to have to stay indefinitely, which was not what we wanted to hear at that point. But anyway, the commandant then told us to about face, and when he did, they played the national anthem, and then we breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that we were going to get out. So anyway, after survival school, I went to Athens in Greece and flew on RC-135 airplanes, which are 737s or 707s maybe, that are converted for reconnaissance. And I spent about 6 or 7 months in Athens, and then came back to the Defense Department and worked the rest of my time in there until I got out of the Air Force in 1978 and was picked up by the Defense Department to go to Turkey to work in the embassy over there. And I worked in the embassy for a couple of years and met my future wife, the mother of my two children. And then spent a couple of years there until 1980, at which time there was a coup in Turkey and the military took over. So that was kind of exciting. And then back to Washington to learn Hindi and Urdu, the languages of India and Pakistan, respectively. And then I went to Pakistan for 5 years, from 1982 to 1987 in Islamabad and Karachi. And I worked at the embassy and the consulate, respectively, there in those places. And then came back and at that point, I had two little girls, Bahar and Renan. And we went back to Washington and kind of settled in to the Washington way of life until 2001, when I went back to Ankara to the embassy for another tour. And I spent 4 years until 2005, during which time the war with Iraq came to pass. So then I decided that I wanted to retire. I had enough time in because I had a lot of overseas time, which gave me an edge. So I was able to retire at 55, at age 55. But this will happen to you, Jerry. At some point, you'll have to decide what you're going to do with yourself once you do retire. You know, I don't play golf, so that wasn't going to work for me. So I'd always had an interest in Ottoman Turkish, but had never studied it. I'd made my career with regular Turkish, today's Turkish, but I was always fascinated by Ottoman Turkish and the Ottoman script. So I decided that was going to be my retirement career. And once I got back to Turkey, I began to take courses in Ottoman language. And then by that time, I'd been divorced, and I met another woman who became my second wife, Muge. And coincidentally, her grandfather, had been captured by the Russians during the First World War. And he kept a diary of his entire time, from the time he left Istanbul until he returned, or until he finished his POW camp time in a place east of Moscow. So my first Ottoman project was to translate his little notebooks from Ottoman into Turkish. And then that was published in 2010 in Turkish, in modern Turkish. And I also translated it into English, but we never were able to get it published in English. Nevertheless, we're still trying to do that. But following that, I began to do a lot of translations of material that I found from the Turkish history establishment. And I've published those on academia over the course of the past 10 years or so. Fascinating stuff. And the best thing about it is that it's a bottomless pit. You never get to the bottom of it, which, as a history major, I'm sure you know, Jerry. So for the longest time, I translated, as you would expect a translator to translate, by hand. But over the last year, and this is very interesting, AI has become so proficient at translation, Google Translate and some other AI tools, that they can do it much better than I can. So what I have been doing lately is transcribing from the Ottoman script to modern Turkish, and then I feed the modern Turkish into a particular AI tool that instantaneously translates it, whereas it would take me hours to translate. The AI tool translates it instantaneously, essentially. And then I edit that, and then I put it out on academia and generally get a good response in terms of people around the world being interested in the subjects, which is heartening, of course. But the best thing about academia is there are no editors and no um, deadlines, and you just get it done and do it whenever you want to. You don't make any money out of it, but that's fine. It's just the satisfaction of it all. So that's brought me to today, where I am here in Istanbul, and uh, enjoying it. It's an interesting place to live.
You mentioned going to college at St. John's and then at and over in Mayville. Your major was that history or was it something else?
No, it was journalism.
Okay.
Yeah, which has, to a large extent, been eclipsed by AI as well these days, from what I'm reading.
Mhm.
AI is a phenomenon. It's marvelous in many ways, but it's kind of scary as well. But obviously, we're going to have to learn to live with it.
Do you have any interesting stories you want to share about your time in the service with the U.S. Air Force? Anything that sticks out to you the most?
Well, of course, there was POW training, which was not something you're ever going to forget. Hopefully, you never have to use it, and unfortunately, in my case, I didn't. But again, as I said, having gone to Maryville in 1970, my first time out of New York City, essentially, and then down to Lackland, Texas, for U.S. Air Force basic training. That got me out of my neighborhood, so to speak. I was, as many young people are, they get stuck in the neighborhood and end up there forever. But for some reason, I wanted to get out. I wanted to see what the rest of the world had to offer. So I really felt once I got to Athens and I was getting up and getting my flight suit on and getting into the airplane every day, I felt like I was really in the Air Force. A lot of guys that I went to basic training with would end up in fixing airplanes or stuff like that never got them into the airplane. So I felt fortunate that I had those flights out into the Eastern Mediterranean, where we would fly along the coast back and forth for 10 hours. And it was reconnaissance, so we're trying to figure out what everybody's doing out there. And then come back to Athens, and then I got a place off base with a couple other friends of mine. And, we were living pretty well there as bachelors in Athens at that time. But then I had to go back to Washington. They sent me back to Washington. But then after that, I got a couple of trips out with the Navy, which was just kind of a coincidence. But I went up into the Black Sea because they needed somebody who could translate Turkish. These Navy ships would go up into the Black Sea. They called them Silver Fox missions, where we wanted to show the Russians that the Black Sea wasn't their lake. So every so often, the Navy would send a couple of ships into the Black Sea just to make a tour around the entire sea. And so I got to do that a couple of times, which was kind of neat. And, I guess I could say that in my 4 years in the Air Force, I really had more fun than work. And it was a great preparation for real work because I'd been kind of a spoiled brat growing up in New York City. I had 4 older sisters, and you can imagine what that was like in terms of being a spoiled brat. So I needed the discipline that the military provided Of course, I found that out over the course of time, but it just made a big difference in my life after that, because then I was able to conduct myself like a mature person and to exercise discipline in whatever I was doing, whether that was at work or at home with my kids or in every respect. So the decision I made to join the Air Force when I was a senior in college was probably the most critical decision I made in my life.
You mentioned you was a representative to the State Department and I believe you said Senate over in Washington. I was looking at a biography. It also says that you worked alongside the CIA, or you was a representative. What is your comment on that? What was that like? Or
Well, that was fascinating because when I was in Pakistan, the issue that I was working on was the Pakistan nuclear bomb program. So I became something of an expert on that. So then when I got back to Washington in the late 1980s, I was able to get what they call details, where they send you off to another agency where you can work and help out and share your expertise that they don't necessarily have at these various places. So first of all, I went to the Senate on a fellowship, and I worked in the office of Kent Conrad, who was then the senator from North Dakota. And I made a couple of trips out to North Dakota on Amtrak because one of the things that they were keenly interested in doing was keeping their Amtrak service. So I made a couple of trips on Amtrak out to North Dakota, and it's just a fascinating place that I never would have gone to otherwise, of course. And so that was a great experience to be in the Senate for a year and see how that works or doesn't, as the case may be. But after that, I think the next place I went to, well, prior to the Senate, I'd gone to the State Department to work on the Pakistani problem and spent some number of months there. And then after the Senate, that's when I went to the CIA, again, to work on the Pakistan issue. And it was essentially, they had no one with my expertise or my experience, let's put it that way, as far as the Pakistan project was concerned. So that's why I spent a year there and then went back to the Defense Department until my boss called me one day and told me, "You're going back to Turkey." And that was in 2001. By that time, my girls had gone off to college. So I was able to go back to Turkey in 2001 at the embassy. And that was a fascinating time because then the war broke out with Saddam Hussein. And then the Turkish political system changed dramatically. And the current president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, his party began to take over by means of elections the Turkish government, and been in charge now for 25 years. So that was sort of a pivotal moment in history for me and for lots of other folks because of the war in Iraq and because of the change in government in Turkey. Up until that point in Turkey, the military had been very strong and very influential. But once Erdogan and his party came in, that the military's power and influence diminished over time. And of course, then in 2016, there was another coup attempt against Erdogan that time, which he survived. And just the other day here, there was the 10th anniversary of that coup, or that attempted coup, we should say. So lots of interesting events that I've witnessed over the last 50 years that I've been involved with Turkish and Turkey. And it was all based on my decision to join the Air Force, uh, and for the Air Force to send me to learn Turkish.
You're still living in Turkey today. What made you decide to stay over in Turkey? Because it seems like that's where you've decided to retire and is in Turkey. What was that part that just said, you know what, I'm just going to move here and settle down in Turkey? What made you decide that?
Well, as I said, I had decided that my retirement project would be learning Ottoman Turkish and working with that. And no better place to do that than Istanbul. At first, I went back to Ankara, which was my sort of home base in Turkey. But then I realized that if you're going to be involved with Ottoman Turkish, you need to be in Istanbul. So then I moved to Istanbul. But beyond that, the cost of living is so favorable for someone like me with an American dollar retirement salary. And that's still the case today. So that had a big impact on my decision as well, in terms of quality of life and being able to afford, a decent lifestyle. Whereas if I had remained in Washington, I probably would have had to go, get a job with a Beltway bandit or, uh, something like that. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to go off on my own. And fortunately, over the last 20 years, I've been able to follow the path that I set out at that time.
You mentioned predominantly being raised, and correct me if I'm wrong, being raised Catholic. You went to Catholic schools, you went to a Catholic college, graduated from that. Have you always been Catholic, or has that changed at all since your experiences and now living in Turkey? If you are still Catholic, you still have that same faith, do people around you know of that faith, or is that just something you like to not really talk about while in Turkey? Because in the United States, people have this predetermined idea of Turkey and being it predominantly Islamic. And so kind of want to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic, but when I was a teenager, I began to question the whole system. And the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense to me. So I drifted away, essentially. And here, nobody, in all the time I've been here, nobody has ever given me any heartburn about either being an American or assuming that I was a Christian as opposed to a Muslim. I have never experienced anything like that. Others may have, I don't know. But in Turkish history, they have been pretty tolerant of other religions. Uh, uh, you probably know about the acceptance of the Jewish migration from Spain around the time of Columbus. Um, and all of the subjects of the Ottoman Empire were, on paper, allowed to continue with their own beliefs and their own religions. I'm sure there were some exceptions to that. And then there were some tragic and unfortunate episodes that occurred, especially during the First World War. But personally, as I said, I have never felt any discomfort, shall we say. I mean, people know that I'm not Turkish, even though I can speak Turkish. They immediately know that I'm an American because my accent is that of an American speaking Turkish. So just like somebody from your region,
Mhm.
as opposed to somebody from Queens in New York City, based on their accent, people here know that I'm probably an American, but they don't give me any cause for discomfort in terms of being an American or assuming that I'm a Christian.
One thing I am curious, and we don't have to talk about it. Of course, I'm not trying to force you to talk about it, but you have mentioned the POW training that you had to go through. Is that something you want to explore more right now? If not, that's okay. I just don't want to force you to do anything. But would you want to show some insights of what that would look like to somebody who doesn't know, somebody who don't understand about the military and those trainings?
Yeah. Well, it was almost, Jerry, in the same way that you and I have a common thread there in Maryville. Um, it's interesting. The POW training that I had then came back to help me when I was working on, and this, my wife's grandfather's diaries from his time as a POW in Russia. So I could really empathize with him based on the fact that I had an experience, a POW experience myself. His was much more severe, much worse, of course. But nevertheless, the POW training that I had at Fairchild Air Force Base it was tough to go through, but looking back, it was well worth it for me for the reasons that I just explained. Because then subsequently, I worked on a lot of memoirs of Turkish prisoners taken by the Russians in particular, but also by the Greeks in the First World War and then the Turkish War of Independence. So it was very valuable for me to have had that training, but it was so realistic that again I said we thought we were there for the duration. They would put us in these little boxes, where you would be cramped in for some period of time, and then someone decided that I ought to escape or try to escape. So, like a dope, I agreed, and I tried to escape, and of course they caught me, and they really roughed me up, having caught me as an escapee. They really roughed me up, and I can remember after having gotten out, I was taking a shower the next day, and I couldn't let the water in the shower hit my chest because it was so sore from the People's Liberation Army guys, who were Air Force guys, of course, but they in these uniforms of the People's Liberation Army. But they had beat me so badly that I couldn't let the water hit my chest without feeling pain. So that's just an indication of how realistic it was.
I want to focus a little bit on more recent history. About 6 years ago, if you can recall, that was about the time of COVID-19. I want to hear your experience on that. If it did, how did COVID change your way of life for that time period, for that short time period? Did anything about that change? Did your research methods or anything like that change during COVID?
Well, I had that much more time to work because I was over 65 at that point. So according to the conditions and the strictures that were imposed by the local government here in Istanbul, I couldn't go out. So I was sort of locked in, and that gave me more time to work. But interestingly, as COVID was winding down, that's when I went to London for that get together at the Turkish English Association, and I spoke there about this, that, and the other thing. And then, interestingly, I went to Washington, and up until that point, I'd been fine. But once I got to Washington, I got COVID, and wow, it was bad. And but fortunately, by that point in time, they had developed the medicine, and the doctor agreed to give me the medicine because of my age. I was over 70 at the time. So He let me take the medicine, and in 5 days I was back to normal, and I was able to get on the plane and come back here from Washington. But COVID was a big deal.
Right, you was in Turkey, was in Istanbul during the time. Going out after those restrictions, what was it like? Did anything change from before COVID and after once those restrictions were lifted? Do you see noticeable change, or was it about the same? Did things kind of return back to normal?
No, the dramatic change has been food delivery. People got so used to not going out and calling for meals that after that there has been just a proliferation of these motorcycle couriers, and now they're like mosquitoes or flies. They're all over the roads. They go in every direction imaginable, and that for me that was the big change that COVID wrought here in my in the area where I live in Istanbul. But it's true all over the country, really.
If you want to add anything, you're more than welcome to do so.
Well, my dad was also in the Air Force in World War II. He was a navigator, and he was based in England, and he flew out of there over Germany, and just saw too many of his comrades get shot up and killed and whatnot. So he rarely talked about it. But the fact that he had done that influenced me to join the Air Force in particular, as opposed to the Marines or the Army or the Navy. So like we were saying, these little things that happen in your life turn out to be big things sometimes. And, the connections are fascinating, especially when you look back on them.
Like you mentioned, the Vietnam War was over, so you didn't have to worry about going to Vietnam. And you said, thankfully, you didn't have to.
Well, I almost did.
Almost did. See,
because when they had the draft, and then they decided they were going to do it by a lottery. So the first year they had the lottery, I was 17. I was a freshman at St. John's at that time in New York City. And that was the first year they did the lottery. And my birthday was the 5th number picked. So if I had been 18, I would have gone.
oh wow.
And then the next year when I was 18, my birthday was picked 350. So there was no way I was going to go. So it was just pure luck that I didn't get sent over there just because of my birthday. And I'll always be grateful for that. And, the direction of my life that changed because of that.
While that was going on, what were your thoughts on that as well? Did they always have the draft with Vietnam, or when?
No, well, they had the draft up into Vietnam. Every young man got a draft card and would have to go into the military service unless you got a deferment somehow. Like Trump got the bone spurs deferment, and other people got college deferments and different kinds of deferments. But for the most part, if you didn't have any excuse, let's put it that way, you had to go. And then the Vietnam War was so horrific, and so many people were so badly hurt and killed in the Vietnam War, that caused Washington and Congress and the White House to change the law to make it a lottery, whereby they thought that would be more equitable rather than just taking everybody lock, stock, and barrel. You have this sort of lottery situation, which you kind of leave it up to fate. And it was based on your date of birth. So that, as I said, that when I was 17, that was the first year they did the lottery system, as opposed to the draft system, which preceded it. But I was not eligible, fortunately. Otherwise, I would have had to go. But the next year, I was able to avoid it. But it was, something nobody wanted to do at that point. That was like in 1970 or 71, and you know, it was pretty horrible over there. Nobody wanted to go
Yeah, yeah.
if they could avoid it.
During that time, did you keep up with the news? Did you watch the news at all regarding Vietnam or what was going on around the world or in the United States?
Well, a little bit, it was unavoidable, but interestingly, Jerry, as I said, the Air Force sent me out to learn Turkish. But when I finished basic training, they put the list up on the bulletin board of who was going to get what language, and uh, Arabic or Russian or whatever. And myself and two other guys got Turkish, and we looked at each other and we said, "What's Turkish?" I had no clue about Turkey or Turkish or anything uh, related to it. So uh, it was a completely new line of work for me, so to speak. And then I went out to California, which was great. If you're going to be in the military, there's no better place to be than Monterey, California. So that worked out pretty well.
Do you know any other languages, and are you currently studying any other languages?
Well, as I said, I spent 5 years in Pakistan. I knew Urdu, which is the language of Pakistan, uh, very well at that time. That was 40 years ago, though. But occasionally now, when I watch a movie, like a Bollywood movie, I can catch some of it, but it's sort of lapsed, shall we say? But I was very good in those and then I tried to learn the Central Asian languages, which are related to Turkish. I took some courses in Turkmen, Uzbek, and the languages of the new Turkic republics that emerged after the Soviet Union broke up. Um, I got into a program. I convinced the people at the Defense Department that they needed to know about these new countries, and I needed to learn their languages so I could find out what was going on. So they let me go all over the world to London and conferences, and out to Indiana University for some courses in Turkmen and Uzbek and whatnot. Um, but then, as soon as I finished all of that, then my boss sent me back to Turkey. So I had to get back into Turkish at that point. And I've been in that situation ever since. So the languages that I did learn, other than Turkish, have pretty much lapsed. Well, I want them, like yourself, Jerry. I want them to open their minds to history and to. I mean, there are so many distractions in daily life, and as we mentioned before, living in the States, you rarely look outside the States. So I want them to, if I can share anything with them, it's to open their minds to the rest of the world, shall we say, and what's going on, and how it, as you mentioned, Jerry, how it affects, this butterfly effect, that, what happens someplace else, could certainly have an effect on you in particular. It's just remarkable the way these coincidences happen. Um as we mentioned before, Maryville and POW training and different things like that you know, come back to serve you well. So that's my message to them, is to to keep their minds open, and to meet the challenge of AI, however that's going to affect them. Uh, they are growing up in a world that's completely different than the one I, and now AI. Um, so I'm curious to see how they're going to turn out, so to speak, in the sense that AI is changing, and I'm sure you see it as an educator. It's changing so much of what we thought we knew. Uh, so I'm curious to see how they're going to progress in this new world we're in.